The world, as I said earlier, is more dangerous and divided. The U.S. has fundamentally changed its approach to trade, raising its tariffs to levels last seen during the Great Depression. Many of our former strengths, based on our close ties to America, have become our weaknesses that we must correct. There are some who say there's no need for a comprehensive plan. They believe we should wait it out in the hope that the United States will return to normal, that the good old days will come back. But hope isn't a plan, and nostalgia is not a strategy.
Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney weighing in on the future of Canada's economy yesterday, specifically pointing out the country's ties to the United States. This isn't Carney's first time speaking up against America's economic strategy under the Trump administration. He has made similar remarks at the World Economic Forum back in January, drawing criticism from the president at the time. Meanwhile, our next guest is calling out President Trump's apocalyptic wartime rhetoric. Historian Timothy Snyder writes in a piece for Substack, in part, quote, "Yes, the United States has undertaken atrocities before. That makes it all the more important, all the more urgent that we catch ourselves now. Neither the evil nor the good in our history determines who we are. It is what we do now." And Timothy Snyder joins us now. He's a professor at the Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy at the University of Toronto. He's also the author of several books, including On Freedom and On Tyranny. So I just think of this right here. A whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again. Why don't we start right there? Number one, saying it and the concerns and dangers of that. But then number two, not doing it, there's a credibility issue as well. What do you think the biggest concerns are about the way this president messages?
Yeah, I mean, number one, when he says it, he's revealing things about himself, that he can imagine a world in which people destroy whole civilizations.
Yeah.
He's also setting up a situation where I think all Americans have to react and say, we're not that sort of person, regardless of what the country does, what the military does, because if we don't say anything, we're normalizing it. Right. And also we have to remember that once he says things like that, the future actions of U.S. soldiers will be interpreted in that light. So if the president says we're committing genocide, then destroying dams and destroying civilian infrastructure, desalination, that becomes a genocidal crime. But you're right, he also played Chamberlain to his own Hitler. I mean, he basically said, we're going to genocide you, and then the same day he pulled back. And that is a problem as well, because it means, okay, now we have the United States, which threatens all the time and has its bluff called the same day, which makes us look even weaker than we have been.
So he has reiterated threats today, didn't claim to wipe out civilization, but said that infrastructure will be targeted. Again, a war crime if Iran does not open up the Strait of Hormuz again. But let's go back to the threat, which was so striking. And we were talking earlier on the show, aides have since justified it, saying, look, it worked. They got Iran to it was part of the art of the deal. Play the madman. It got Iran to the table, even if those negotiations didn't yield an immediate agreement. But how does it change how the rest of the world views us? The United States used to, yes, you're right, has committed atrocities before, but still sort of was portrayed itself as defender of freedom. The rest of the world looked up to us in many ways. And it seems like that moral high ground long since gone.
Yeah, it's a wonderful point, but one has to start by saying it didn't actually bring the Iranians to the table. Nobody in Iran seems, at least in the leadership, seems to have been concerned about it. It was essentially a bluff that was called. And I think Americans have a hard time understanding that we are losing this war and therefore are not in a power position to tell the Iranians what to do. And no amount of bluffing is going to change that. And I'm afraid no amount of targeting civilian infrastructure is going to change that either. That's just going to entrench that's just going to entrench the leadership. But yeah, your point is the important one. What we are doing is we're saying it's okay for other countries to fight wars like this. There's a much bigger war going on, which is the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The Russians have committed atrocities from the beginning. They've said from the beginning, our goal is to wipe out the Ukrainian nation. What we're doing is we're normalizing all of that. We're saying it's okay for all of us to live in a world where one country tries to wipe out another nation.
But in terms of how any of this reads internationally, in terms of does any of this feel distinctly American? I mean, you have been, I think, ahead of the curve in pointing out that a lot of what feels American about this administration, even Project 2025, actually goes back to a specific country that J.D. Vance was just campaigning in. Could you explain the inspiration that you see?
That's a wonderful point. I mean, I think all around the world, whether it's Moscow or Budapest or Washington, D.C., we have these right-wing oligarchical figures who care more about each other than they do about their own countries. We're Americans. We think about America. We think, okay, we have an American president. But from Trump's point of view, is Putin more important than 330 million Americans? Are gas prices for 300 million Americans more important? Or is revenue for Putin more important? I think it's the latter. And Orban stood between Putin and Trump. Orban was the European who legitimated these international networks of ideas, of personal contacts, and of money. The American right, and especially MAGA, is much more cosmopolitan, much more international than people realize. And that's why Orban's defeat is so important.
Joe.
Your writing, along with Anna Applebaum's over the past 5, 6, 7 years, just absolutely critical. And, of course, like you, pointed to Orban, pointed to what was going on in Poland with the Law and Justice Party. I am, and because obviously that's how democracy moves to autocracy, moves to dictatorship. We're in a fascinating time, aren't we? We're in a fascinating time where Orban is completely crushed by 2/3 of the voters in Hungary at a time when Russia and Donald Trump are desperately trying to elect him. And at the same time, you have everybody from Italy, right-wing populists from Italy to Great Britain running away from Donald Trump as much as they can. Nigel Farage suddenly saying, oh, he's just a passing acquaintance, and not a good one at that. Talk about this moment that we are in. Caddy asked earlier, and none of us can ever be this optimistic, but will we look back at 2026 as sort of peak populism for Europe?
I think Kadi was making a good point. I mean, the Orban formula was essentially the Trump formula. Be an oligarch, have oligarchs around you, divert tax money, and in Orban's case, also EU money towards you and your friends. Give people an enemy. In Hungary, it was first the Jews, then it was the Ukrainians. Tell them that politics is all about the enemy. And in Hungary, people made the connection. They made the connection between the corruption and the failing economy. And I think that's the key connection that the opposition in the U.S. has to make as well. The reason why we're against abuse of power is because we want to be free, but we also don't want to be poor. And that's the connection that Magyar in Hungary, the opponent to Orban, was able to make. If you can make that connection between corruption at the top and the failure of the economy below, then you can win huge. And I think it's still sinking in. It's very significant that Orban lost, but it's also very significant that he lost by a huge amount. These kind of breakthrough election results are possible.
So, Professor, at the risk of being this morning's Pollyanna and extending the optimism, one of the other things that is striking about the Hungary election is just how many people turned out. 80% of the population turned out to vote. We're facing a midterm election here in America, which has all of the signs of being a big turnout election as well. Recent special elections in the States have had large turnouts comparative to their historical precedents. So you've written a lot about how democracy is weak because we don't care for it, because we don't protect it. Do you think this could also be a moment in which tyranny looks to be weak because it's corrupt and people vote and turn out in large numbers to vote to protect something that they had that perhaps they hadn't realized how important it was to vote, but now they are realizing they want to vote for democracy and for all of that gives them, as opposed to for tyranny?
I think that can happen, but there's a piece which is missing, which is in between. We can't rely on the election on its own, and we can't even rely on people to vote. The connection has to be made in the meantime. People have to speak out. They have to talk about how extraordinarily awful things are. There has to be local organizing and big protests between now and then. That's also the election of Hungary. I mean, we can be impressed by the electoral outcome, but what happened in Hungary was a result of 2 years of campaigning around the entire country by the opposition. It was a result of courageous stories broken by opposition media, which made scandals real. In other words, it wasn't the result just of Election Day, as you know very well. It was a result of a campaign which brought people in and got them to think my vote is part of a historical moment where things can change. I think that's some work which still has to be done in the U.S. We can't just count on the Democrats. We can't just count on November. There's a lot of stuff that has to happen in the meantime.
Our professor at the Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy at the University of Toronto, author and historian Timothy Snyder. Thank you very much for coming on the show this morning.